All right, welcome to MMA on the Rocks. My name is Bill Welger, and you are listening to episode number 92. Today is Monday. I'm not used to saying that. May the 14th, the day after Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. Happy Mother's Day to my mother, if you're listening, which I know you do occasionally. And I hope everybody had an enjoyable Mother's Day, and that's why we're recording a day late. We took the day off in honor of the mothers. So I would also like to wish a happy Mother's Day to the mother of my co-host, who's joining me fresh off of almost taking a nap all the way from New Jersey, Jeff, the Animal Wilson. Jeff, how you doing on this Monday afternoon? And happy Mother's Day to your mother.
Thanks, Bill. Happy Mother's Day to your mom too. It's been a weird day, Bill. It started off pretty chilly and then it got warm, so it's like desert weather out here.
Yeah, we're having some weird weather too. It's getting into like rainy season here, and it's unfortunate for my sister. She's coming to visit this week, and it's supposed to rain every single day she's here. So she's coming down from New York for some Florida sunshine, and she's gonna get some Florida monsoon weather. But it is good for my mango trees, so I guess there's a give and take there. I want to start. There was a ton of MMA action this weekend, but before we get into that, Jeff, I want to tell you a story about something that happened to me over the weekend. So I have central air conditioning in my house, and it's two separate units for the downstairs and the upstairs. The upstairs unit shut off at the thermostat, so I pulled it off the wall. I changed the batteries, put it back on, and it still wasn't working. So then I found some water in the hallway, so I climbed up into the attic, and the overflow switch was triggered, which means there's probably a clog in the drain line, something along those lines. And I went up there with a shop vac and I vacuumed up the water, and I'm kind of tinkering around with it. So I'm standing on the very top rung of the ladder, if you can picture this, and the rest of my body is inside the attic. So only from like my knees down are out of the attic. And I'm tinkering around with this HVAC unit, and all of a sudden, the biggest hornet I've ever seen in my life comes flying right at my face while I'm standing on the top of this ladder, and I have nowhere to go. So, luckily, I've gotten I've gotten back into boxing lately, Jeff, and my head movement didn't fail me. I had to very gently bob my head out of the way while this thing flew right at my face. So I climbed down off the ladder. Luckily, I didn't fall. Climbed down off the ladder. I closed the bedroom where my daughter was in case the hornet decided to come out of the attic. And I got a bug spray, and I went back up there and I couldn't find it. And then I turned around and the thing's flying right for my face again. So I I sprayed the thing in midair, and all the bug spray, it's like a fogger. It all just blows back into my face. And the hornet, it was like a movie. It dropped like this far from my face. It just dropped
Jeez.
right into the attic, into a bed of insulation. So I went up there and looked around, and luckily there wasn't a nest. It was just a rogue hornet that was up there. But pretty terrifying experience, Jeff. I got to say, I felt like I was in a National Lampoon's movie or something like that. Needless to say, there was a large quantity of alcohol consumed after I got down from the attic. But in any case, the air conditioner's fixed. All is right in the world. And, tequila. So anything interesting going on in your life, Jeff, or am I the only one living in a comedy movie these days?
Yeah, I think it's just you, Bill. I mean, I had a wasp come into my classroom while I was teaching, and I'm the teacher, so I can't miss work, so I just had one of the kids kill it.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, they got to earn their medal somehow.
Yeah.
In any case, let's get into some. We'll start off with UFC. Obviously, there was Bellator card this weekend as well, but UFC was a pay-per-view, much bigger card. Not a ton of marketing behind it. I would be interested to see the numbers, how they did in terms of pay-per-view buys. It looked like the arena in Rio de Janeiro was very thin. For the undercard, there was almost nobody. And even during the main card, it looked like they were trying not to pan the audience at all. Usually there's like some celebrities and who's here, and they pan around and people drinking beers and, girls with their tits out and whatever else. None of that for this. And I don't know if it's because the gate didn't do well or whatever the case was. So UFC 224 was headlined by women's bantamweight champion Amanda Nunes. And she was fighting her former teammate Raquel Pennington. So you had some strong opinions on this fight last week, Jeff. You thought Rocky would be able to get the job done here. You thought she had the tools to take Amanda out. What were your thoughts on the fight? And there was some controversy with the ending as well. We'll get into that. What were your thoughts on the fight and the way it finished itself?
Bill, I thought Nunez looked flawless in there. I thought her cardio was going to be a bigger issue. I don't know what she's been doing, but it's working. She by the end of that fight, she looked like she had finished her warm up or something like in the locker room. Her cardio was awesome. Her striking was not as vicious as it usually is. It was controlled. It was technical. It wasn't her trying to swing for the fences. It was, which she's super technical as it is, but she was picking Pennington apart. And Pennington, I think she was a little too respectful, bordering probably scared of Amanda Nunes. And, that fear ended up making her want to essentially stop fighting after the fourth round, which you can't blame her for. She was dinged up. Her nose looked like it was probably broken. And she turned to her cornerman and she said, I want out. I don't want to do this anymore. And her cornerman kind of looked like he just lost a family member and was just like, no, let's do this. Let's give it everything we got. And
Yes. All right, go ahead.
sorry
Finish,
to cut
Jeff.
you off, but into the fifth round, I didn't hear Rocky's corner at all. I didn't hear any technical advice. Even that talk in between the fourth and fifth rounds, there was no technical advice. It was just let's give it everything we've got. Which Bill, just the way he sounded, he knew. I don't know Rocky's coach. I don't know his name, but excuse me, he sounded like he had kind of given up. And I think that sending Rocky into that fifth round was a really bad decision. I felt like they probably should have thrown in the towel.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting perspective. Before I comment on how the fight ended and Raquel Pennington being sent out for that fifth round, I don't want to take anything away from Amanda Nunes' performance, which, as you said, was pretty flawless. What we're seeing now is a composed Amanda Nunes who is able to conserve her energy and throw smart punches. She's not throwing big looping shots trying to put her opponent away. She was throwing shots right down the middle with beautiful extension on her punches. It was really awesome to watch. And that low calf kick she was using against Raquel Pennington really threw Rocky off. And you lose that lead leg, you can't shoot for takedowns. You can't get as much power on your punches. It was a really spectacular game plan, and she was just so composed. This is a scary thing because the recipe to beat Amanda Nunes used to be simple: survive the first round, and then she'll gas out. Even her teammates would say this about her in the past. And most people didn't make it out of that first round, which is why she was so scary. Now I believe we have a scarier Amanda Nunes. Does she still have that same power now that she has increased cardio? I don't know. We also didn't see a call out of Cyborg, which I think a lot of people were hoping for. A lot of people want to see that super fight between the bantamweight champion and the featherweight champion. I don't know that that's off the table because I thought that fight was going to come together, and then all of a sudden we had this fight. So it seemed like it was put way on the back burner. But in any case, let's talk about Raquel Pennington's corner because she did turn to her corner and say, I'm done. I want to be done. And they sent her out for the fifth round and said, get out there and let's recover later. Get out there and give it everything you got. So I have mixed feelings about this, Jeff, because I feel like when a fighter is done, the corner should be responsible and throw in the towel. But you also don't know what kind of relationship she has with her corner because you and I have both been through the kind of workouts and through the kind of sparring where you say things like that and then a minute later you feel fine, because you're just so exhausted and so beat up. But you don't know if she would have regretted it for the rest of her life if she didn't go out for that fifth round, which is what her girlfriend or wife, Tisha Torres, had said about the decision. She said, I agree with Rocky's coaches to send her out there. We know her best, and she would have regretted it if she didn't do it. And sometimes it's easy to just say those things because you feel so busted and broken up and exhausted, and she got so completely outmatched. But that doesn't mean she couldn't have gone out there in that fifth round and catch Amanda just right. I mean, it was a really low percentage, but sometimes you got to take that chance, and it's a tough call. Like we saw last month, Joe Lozon's corner wisely threw in the towel for him because they know him. They have that relationship with him. They know what he's been through in his training camp. If he's been knocked out during that training camp or whatever else happened, if he had injuries. So you kind of have to trust that Raquel's corner knew what they were doing, but at the same time, you brought up a good point where they weren't really giving her much technical advice. And they didn't say go out there and try this, try the 1-2, follow with a head kick. They weren't giving her any tips or ways that she could win. They just wanted her to go out there and be able to say that she finished the fight. So on the one hand, I have to defend the corner because, I know guys who say things like that, and that's just them venting, and they really have the gas in the tank to get out there. They just need that push. So maybe Raquel needs to be motivated in that way, and her corner knows that. But then again, they should have been doing a better job of actually coaching her through the fight. So I don't think they deserve as much criticism as they've been getting just because of the fact that, you know, they let her go out on her shield. It's not like she was incoherent and seemed like she was getting brain damage. I mean, she had a broken nose, but it's a broken nose. Breathe through your mouth. And then it doesn't look good that she got finished a little while after that. But it seems like they're all friends. They were training partners. I guess Tisha used to be Amanda Nunes' coach. I also want to make note that this is the first time two openly gay fighters have fought each other for a world championship. So that's a really cool thing. And I thought it was a great fight to cap off what was a spectacular card with 11 finishes, which I think tied for the second most in UFC history. So from what was a very underwhelming card on paper, I think was actually one of the best cards of the year, if not the best card of the year so far. We had some really exciting fights and some really awesome and unique finishes. Anything else on the main event here, Jeff?
Yeah, I think you brought up some interesting points in regarding the corner, and you're right. They probably know Rocky better than we do. Um, but I think if you're gonna send out your fighter like that on their shield, like you said, at least give her some advice, give her something to work with. But again, like you said, it's a gray area, unfortunately. But I think we can move on. I did want to add something, but for the life of me, I can't remember what it is. So, Bill, why don't we go through this co-main event here? Because I was really excited for it.
Awesome. Yeah. This, I think, was the fight of the night. If you remember what you wanted to say, Jeff, you can just bring it up at any time. I'm not going to edit it back to the beginning because, as you all know, I don't edit this show. We plug and go and then we post it. That's how we roll on MMA on the Rocks. So the co-main event, fight of the night, in my opinion, not even close. This fight was so back and forth, and it was back and forth everywhere a fight can go. So Kelvin Gastelum getting the split decision win over Jacare Souza. And this surprised me for a couple of reasons. I kind of scored Jacare winning the fight. I also could have seen it being a draw. So I scored the first round for Jacare, which was a very clear win for him. The second round was a very clear win for Kelvin. I would even entertain the argument that it was a 10-8 round because Jacare was almost finished in that round. But then I scored a third round for Jacare, but that third round was really close. So if you give Kelvin the 10-8 in round two, then it would have been a draw. But if you did it 1-1 and then the third round for Jacare would have gotten the decision. That's the way I thought it was going to go. I thought it was super close, but given the fact that this fight was in Brazil, I thought 100% the decision is going to go to the Brazilian fighter. So given that it was so close, I'm really surprised that Kelvin came away with the decision. I don't think it was a robbery, but I do think that Jacare did enough to win. Um, but he was almost put away in that second round. And you got to admire Kelvin Gastelum, who's coming up a weight class and just steamrolling this middleweight division. He looks much better as a middleweight than he ever did as a welterweight, in my opinion. And it seems like the guy just it's like Chael Sonnen said, like, you can't really tell like what he's good at, but he's good at winning fights. And that's exactly what he did on Saturday night. So what were your thoughts on this, Jeff? How did you score this one? Did you see it differently than I did?
No, I'm in the same boat as you. I kind of saw it for Souza a little bit more. I felt like he definitely got the first round. His jiu-jitsu on the ground was awesome. Credit to Gastelum for staying calm and wriggling out of the armbar at the end of that first round. The second round, definitely for Kelvin Gastelum. Swolza was clearly out of it. Even as he was going back to his corner, he almost collapsed. I guess he thought the stool was under him, and he just had a lapse of judgment, but he looked really exhausted. And in that last round, I had it for Jacare just because, he looked better on the stand up. I think um, also, his recovery was awesome, and he took down Gastelum a few times. So I really thought that I thought he had it 10-9 in that third round. But again, like you said, maybe if you give it 10-8 to Gastelum, it's a draw. And I was kind of in the same boat because it's in Brazil. I really thought they were going to give it to the Brazilian fighter, considering how close it was. But I guess it was not to be. I guess the judges saw it a little different.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think Jacare's stock goes down any here. It is unfortunate to see for him because he's a guy that I would have liked to see fight for a title, and he's getting up there on years. He's knocking on the door of 40, I believe, 38, 39, somewhere in there. Um, Kelvin Gastelum calling for a title shot. I don't know that that'll happen just because he's had quite a run at middleweight, but there's been a couple of speed bumps. So he started out with the unanimous decision over Johnny Hendricks and kind of an uneventful fight. Then he completely mauled Tim Kennedy. He did the same thing to Vitor Belfort, but remember that fight was overturned because Kelvin tested positive for THC. And then he has the submission loss to Chris Weidman. And then the knockout of Michael Bisping, but it was a Michael Bisping who had just gotten demolished by George St. Pierre not 3 weeks ago. So I actually think the Jacare fight is his most impressive win at middleweight, but I think he's not going to get a title shot because he can't jump the line over Chris Weidman, who I know is out with some injuries because he got finished by Chris Weidman. So there's probably going to have to be another fight for Gastelum. What would you like to see next for each of these guys? Have you given that any thought, Jeff?
Not yet, but Jacare. Yeah, it's tough, man. Jakare's kind of in limbo here. I guess maybe you could have him fight Chris Weidman, but I have they fought each other yet? I'm not even sure.
I don't believe so.
Okay, so
Uh,
maybe we could do that, but I'm kind of in agreement. I don't see Gastelum jumping the line in front of Chris Weidman, especially after that loss. I mean, it was pretty decisive. It's not like it was a close decision. It was a third round submission. So I don't know. I think Gastelum asking for a title shot here is a little premeditated. I'd like to see him actually fight Yoel Romero if Romero loses to Whitaker again, or
yeah,
let him fight the loser of that title fight.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Whoever loses the title fight, make that a number one contender. But then you run into the problem, like say Romero loses and then Romero beats Gastelum. You put Romero in there for a third time against Whitaker. Not a bad problem to have. The middleweight division is pretty exciting. We got some up and coming killers uh, there as well. And we saw a couple of them on the card earlier in Mutante and Carl Roberson. So let's keep moving down the card. So one of the biggest talks leading up to this event was Mackenzie Dern and Amanda Bobby Cooper. So Mackenzie Dern weighing in almost 7.5 pounds over the straw weight limit. So she weighed in, and there were a couple of reasons she was criticized. She weighed in, and immediately after weighing in, she walks over to the breakfast table and starts grabbing some muffins and like whatever else is over there. It just she showed an attitude that she didn't care, and I think that was more damaging to her than actually missing the weight. She's known for missing weight. She's done it many times in the past, and I think it was more excusable before there was a women's flyweight division, but now clearly she should be at flyweight, because if she was even slightly attempting to cut weight and walked in at 123, just fight at 125. There's not that huge of a difference. I would be a little more understanding if it was a day where it was between fighting at 115 or fighting at bantamweight at 135, but this is completely inexcusable. It was disgusting. She got railed on social media. However, if we're just looking at her performance, I have to say her striking did look better. Granted, she put down a girl who was a weight class below her with a big punch, and then her ground and pound was extremely sloppy. And obviously, once she got into jiu-jitsu mode, her jiu-jitsu is super tight, and she was able to finish with the rear naked choke. What were your thoughts on Mackenzie Dern missing weight? The fact that Amanda Bobby Cooper stepped up to take on flyweight essentially, and your thoughts on the fight itself, Jeff?
Yeah, the fight itself, I think that you gave an accurate description. Her striking definitely looked a lot better, especially that overhand right. It looked like, how do I put this? It looked like she was going for it all fight, but oh man, I just wish she didn't loop so much. There was just this huge gap in between her head and her overhand right. But I mean, it's the shot that took Cooper down, so that was pretty good. Like you said, her striking did look much improved. And as for the weight cut, man, I was super disappointed. You don't have to just make weight for MMA. You also have to make weight for jujitsu if you want to cut weight. So it's not something new. It's not something that she hasn't done before. She knows what she's doing. And also, in addition to her missing weight, I heard that she had missed her flight to like a press conference or a weigh-in or something. So she showed up late. She misses weight. I feel like it's just a complete disregard and disrespect for Amanda Cooper, which we talked about. She's kind of being fed to Mackenzie Dern, but I feel like with Kelvin Gastelum, he couldn't make welterweight, so they made him fight at middleweight. So I feel like you kind of have to have the same firmness with Mackenzie Dern. I don't think you let her off the hook. I think that she should be a flyweight. And that story of her just grabbing breakfast after missing weight, that is just, oh man, like that's really disappointing. That
Yeah,
that shows no concern, no respect for the opponent, no respect for the sport in general. Just put her at flyweight.
yeah, agreed. I think the UFC has already made a statement along those lines that they want to see her at flyweight going forward. It's tricky with a fighter like this because she does draw a lot of attention. Her debut, I think, drew a lot of views. She gets a lot of buzz on social media, no matter what she does. But it does seem like the higher the talent level, the more drama comes with them. That seems to be the same across all sports. I mean, you have, your John Jones, and you have, you know, eh, name your celebrity sports athlete that that they're so talented, and then they can't. stay out of trouble. Supposedly, Mackenzie Dern was also kicked out of her gym in Arizona during her fight camp. So I don't know the full story or what happened there, but yeah, fight was on Saturday night, and Mackenzie Dern wanted to get it over with quick because Chick-fil-A is closed on Sundays. So that's probably where the motivation for the first round finish came. In any case, speaking of missing weight, John Lineker was on the card. So John Lineker in an awesome fight against Brian Kelleher. And when we broke this down last week, I had said that obviously on paper, John Lineker should have been the favorite for a lot of reasons. Brian Kelleher was calling up here, and he got what he asked for. And I did say that Brian Kelleher is one of these guys that you can't count out. And I think at no point during the fight was he ever in huge trouble. He wasn't getting his offense off very much. It seemed like he was fighting really hesitant. And then when that finish came, it came like a typhoon in the third round. So Kelleher getting knocked out by a big punch by Lineker, who was probably taking a big risk taking this fight against a much lower ranked opponent. What were your thoughts on this one, Jeff?
Bill, unfortunately, I didn't see the entire fight. I only saw this massive right hand that dropped Brian Kelleher like a bad habit. But man, we've talked about John Lineker quite a few times. The man's named Hand of Stone. When he's on weight, he's dangerous. So much power in his hands. You can't teach that. Um, so he just, from the highlight that I saw, it was only about a minute, but he looked great in there, man.
Yeah, probably the hardest hitter in that bantamweight division. So great performance from him. I don't know where that puts him in the rankings, but always exciting seeing him fight. Maybe give him the loser of TJ Dillashaw and Cody Garbrandt. Maybe give him the loser or the winner of Jimmy Rivera. And it's slipping my mind who Jimmy Rivera is fighting. Do you
I
remember?
believe it's Morhaez, I think he's fighting.
Oh, that's right. That's right. So before that, a little bit of deja vu. So Vitor Belfort getting knocked out with a front kick from Lyoto Machida, looking almost identical uh, as the front kick that Anderson Silva knocked out Belfort with. And after the fight, Belfort leaves his gloves in the cage. He had said this was going to be his last fight, but he also said he wasn't retiring. It was strange. Maybe he's just done in the UFC, or maybe he's retired for good. If that's the case, we have to thank Vitor Belfort for, gosh, almost over 2 decades, uh, pretty close to, if not over 2 decades of mixed martial arts. Youngest UFC heavyweight champion ever, I believe, at 19 years old, or was it light heavyweight? I'm getting confused now. But in any case, one of the most exciting and explosive fighters in UFC history. Always put on great performances. The fight last night was very strange. These guys respected each other a lot in the first round, and neither one of them really engaged much. And then Machida coming out of nowhere with that front kick. It was just he kind of gave like a slight feint, like a turn of the hips, like he was going to throw a leg kick, and then the front kick came right up in Vitor's face, and the respect from Machida was pretty awesome to see. He immediately stepped back and bowed at Vitor, and Vitor was out for a while. It was a very scary knockout. So, what were your thoughts on this fight, Jeff? And what are your thoughts on Vitor's retirement, leaving the gloves in the cage?
Yeah, dude, it was really exciting. Well, not the first round. They kind of just moved around each other, but that second round was nuts with that up kick. Kind of like how Anderson Silva finished Vitor Belfort. And yeah, dude, I loved Machido's respect for him. He bowed to him. He, sat on his heels until Vitor was okay. And dude, I gotta say, obrigado to Vitor Belfort, man. I'll never forget seeing him just demolish Tank Abbott with this flurry of just really powerful punches. And he was one of the first guys. In the days when there were no rules really, when there were no weight classes, you could it's just man, he's been through so many eras of the UFC, and he's been one of those guys that if you want a name for yourself, you have to face him. And I was always a big fan of Vitor Belfort, so I'm glad that if he is retiring, I'm glad that he knows when to retire. He's not one of these guys who, keeps fighting and racks up a bunch of losses. I think he understands what he's done for the sport. I think he understands that, unfortunately, his body is not what it used to be, like when he did win that first heavyweight championship. But credit in the world to both of these guys, man. Two of my favorite Brazilian fighters. It was an awesome matchup to see them in there together.
Yeah, absolutely. And Vitor Belfort, one of these guys who, I'm guilty of it. He's kind of an easy target to make fun of and make memes and everything like that, especially the way his body deflated after USADA came into the picture. But make no mistake, I'm a huge fan of Vitor. I always have been. He's one of the most exciting fighters of all time. And you know, I think probably his fight with Vanderlei Silva was one I remember the most, where he just mauled him and he just like ran across the cage fist first. And Machida calling out Bisping, saying you can't retire without fighting me. So what do you think of this call out, Jeff? And would you like to see that fight?
I love it, man. I think the UFC needs to make it happen. I think Bisping needs to stop being around the bush and just fight Lyoto Machida. Two legends of the sport, and I think it's a great way for Bisping to ride off into the sunset.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so we were talking about the middleweight division and contenders coming up. So we had two of them last night in Cesar Mutante Ferreira and Carl Roberson. So Roberson coming off the contender series, he had a 15-second knockout there, and then he had a submission victory in his first UFC fight. Definitely a highly touted contender. I think he was just jumping into the deep end a little bit too quickly here with Mutante, who has a ton of UFC experience, won the Ultimate Fighter Brazil season 1, I believe. Finished this fight off with a really nice arm triangle that was just so deep and so tight. It was hard to breathe just watching it. So what were your thoughts on this fight, Jeff?
Yeah, Bill, I think that Carl Robertson may have tried to bite off a little bit more than he could chew, because we talked about Mutante last week. The dude is scary. His jujitsu, I would almost compare it to Jakari's jujitsu, where he's trying to hurt you. And that arm triangle looks so tight. And Cesar Ferreira just has those giant delts where you just know when he locks that up, you know that your throat's going to close up quick.
Yeah. So maybe we do Mutante versus Jacare. Uh, that might be an interesting fight. I don't think Robertson goes anywhere after this. I think, maybe since he's a kickboxer, get him somebody in that middleweight division who will get in there and stand with him. I would love to see him get in there with like a Thiago Santos or maybe a lower ranked guy. But I think there's definitely some interesting matchups for him. I don't want to see him go anywhere. I think he definitely has the potential to climb the ranks. I think he just needs to get his feet wet a little bit before jumping in there with a guy like Mutante. So we had another unorthodox finish that was not so surprising. So Alexei Olenek getting the Ezekiel choke again against a diaperless Junior Albini, who was looking pretty good in there. His striking was real crisp. He was busting Olenek's face up, but once that guy gets a hold of your neck, man, he basically locked up the Ezekiel choke, which is basically like the best way to describe it. It's a rear naked choke from the front. So let's call it a front naked choke. Uh, and for those who don't practice jujitsu, this is a move that is almost exclusively done in a gi, because the way you do it, you have to grab a gi collar in order to get enough extension on your arms. Most guys cannot lock this choke up because you have to reach around somebody's head, grab your own bicep, and then get your other hand under the guy's chin. And this is a very difficult thing to do. But I don't know if it's just the way Olenek is built or whatever the case. I mean, we've seen him hit this choke while being mounted. It's just his thing. He just goes for it wherever. So he locks it up and then he pulls half guard and finishes the choke from half guard, which is also really unheard of. The best way to get this choke, even if you're wearing a gi, is from the top position in the mount. It's the by far the easiest way to set it up. So the fact that he's able to do it off of his back and do it so regularly in the heavyweight division, which with especially with a guy like Albini, who I believe cuts weight to make heavyweight, that's a big fucking neck to reach your arms around and get that Ezekiel. So this was the most impressive submission on the card, in my opinion, and there were quite a few of them. What were your thoughts on this one, Jeff?
Yeah, Bill. Honestly, if you gave me 1,000 years to guess how this would finish, I would not think that he would go for that same choke again. Just because it's so hard to pull off. Normally, like you said, it's usually done in a gi because you can kind of reach one hand into your own sleeve, and it gives you a little bit of space to straighten your arms out and get it. Like, dude, I really didn't think he was gonna go for this again, but I love it. I love him for doing it. Junior Albini, he went for it while they were clinched, and Junior Albini, by the time they hit the ground, it was too late for him. But dude, super impressed. As for Junior Albini, I think maybe we should give him someone who's a little bit further down in the rankings. I think he's not ready to roll with some of these top guys yet. I think I think he needs to, like you said before, get his feet wet, um, and maybe take on some unranked guys. I can't think of any off the top of my head. But yeah, man, he was looking good up until that point, man. But that choke is just, I don't know how he does it, but he pulls it off pretty regularly. I'd love to train with Olenek and see how he does that, man.
Yeah, it's just a thing. Like some guys, they just have a certain body type or certain flexibility, and they have that move that they can just pull off from any position. And it's really impressive to see him doing that at this level against guys that size. And in a really thin heavyweight division, it'll be interesting to see what happens with both of these guys. Albini, I think, is super talented, and I think he can get back in there. Um, an interesting matchup might be Olenek and Arlovsky. Arlovsky's been on a tear lately. Olenek has a bunch of finishes. Arlovsky has experience to avoid that ground game, with his Sambo background. So that might be an interesting matchup there. So right before that was another really slick submission. It was Davy Ramos against Nick Hine. So Nick Hine wanted to keep this fight standing, obviously, because Ramos is nasty on the ground. But he knocked Ramos down at one point and asked him to stand back up. He wanted nothing to do with the ground game, and then Ramos hit him with a really nice double leg, took him down from his half guard, locked up a Kimura from top half guard. He then jumped out of half guard, basically jumped over Nick Hine's head and lifted him up, and then slid and took his back. So it was like a Kimura trap back take, and if you're interested in what the Kimura trap system is, look up Wagner Rocha, who is probably most famous for kicking AJ Agazarm off the stage in a in a Polaris grappling tournament at when Agazarm turned his back to him. But Wagner Rocha has the he is basically credited with the Kimura trap system, which is using the Kimura from a bunch of different positions to set up back takes and set up different kinds of finishes that aren't Kimuras or that are also are Kimuras. So it was a really slick back take. The fact that he did it from top half guard was really impressive because he used the Kimura as leverage to kind of turn Nick Hines back to him, and then he slid under his back. You kind of have to watch the fight to see what I'm talking about exactly, but this is definitely worth going back to watch if you haven't seen this. Did you catch this one, Jeff?
I did not, unfortunately. I'm actually trying to look up the highlights now because that setup sounds really sweet to me.
Yeah.
But I'll check it out a little bit later. But yeah, just the way you're describing it sounds really interesting. And in jujitsu, there are certain moves that kind of go well together, like arm bars kind of go with triangles and omoplatas, where you can kind of transition from one into the other with little to no difficulty. So I definitely got to check this out. I've never heard of that actually. That Kimura system sounds really cool. Because Kimuras are more for stronger guys, so I like to go for them. So I might have to check this out. Oh, Bill, sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, so just the yeah, I would definitely say look up that fight, the Ramos versus Hine. It was a quick one. It ended in the first round. They're actually calling the finish a face crank. It was so it was a rear naked choke basically that wasn't under the chin. So before that, uh, Santos, Elizu Santos, and Sean Strickland. So Santos finishes this fight in the first round with a nasty spinning wheel kick and just put Strickland right down to the mat. It was pretty awesome. His nickname, I believe, is Capoeira, and you can see why if you watch this highlight. Another one worth watching. Uh, and then almost all the other fights at the bottom of the card were finishes. So Warley Alves getting a TKO in the second round over Sultan Aliyev. Jack Hermanson knocked out Talis Leites in the third round of their fight, and then Marcus Perez had a really nice rear naked choke over James Boknovic, who is known as a ground fighter. So really awesome bottom of the card. I was kind of like I was half involved in this card in the beginning when I started watching, and it got me hooked. Like I was trying to do some other things while I was watching the prelims, and then I got hooked on them. So uh, Perez was an interesting one. He's another middleweight who's up and coming. Uh, he did lose his last fight to Eric Anders, but a really impressive finish. He's got some really slick jiu-jitsu. So any thoughts on that kind of quick rundown there, Jeff?
Yeah, dude, definitely go back and check out that Eliseo Zaleski dos Santos versus Sean Strickland KO because that spinning wheel kick was beautiful. Out of nowhere, never saw it coming, hit the deck as soon as that kick landed. So super, super exciting fight.
Yeah. And thanks for helping me out with the pronunciation of the name there. And so yeah, really great card. So if this is one that you picked to not watch or to not order for whatever reason, now you get some good fights to go back and watch. Definitely. I would say start with the Jacare and Kelvin Gastelum fight because that fight was bananas. So you have anything else on UFC 224, Jeff, or can we move on to Bellator here?
No, I think we can move on to Bellator because, Bill, honestly, I didn't even know that there was a Bellator card this weekend.
Yeah, a lot of people didn't. I was watching the UFC on my iPad, and I just had the Bellator on TV with the sound off, and it was just kind of background noise. But when a fight was going on in the UFC, I was paying more attention to that. So the only fights really worth talking about. So Aaron Pico, who is one of the top collegiate wrestling prospects to come to transfer into MMA, just an outstanding collegiate wrestler. He also has developed some nasty striking, very young guy. He knocks out Lee Morrison in the first round of their fight. I don't know what the story is here, if this guy was just brought in to get destroyed by Aaron Pico, but Aaron Pico has been very active for Bellator. So he made his debut in June of last year, and he's fought. This was last Saturday night was his fourth fight since then. So he lost his debut. He got submitted with a guillotine in 24 seconds, and then he's been on a streak of 3 straight knockouts. So at only 21 years old, this is a guy who has so much potential for Bellator, and maybe we'll see him in the UFC at some point down the road. Czech Congo, name you probably haven't heard in a long time, gets a first round knockout of Javi Ayala, which is pretty impressive, and things are pretty wide open with the Bellator heavyweight division since the tournament's going on now. So Czech Congo could get back in the running for a title shot. And then the co-main event, probably the most talked about fight on the whole card, and that was John Fitch versus Paul Daly. So you can imagine how this one went. John Fitch took Paul Daly down, passed his guard, and beat the shit out of him for 3 rounds. At the end of the third round, Paul Daly was essentially mounted. He was turned over on his side. John Fitch was over his guard, but kind of keeping one leg hooked just for leverage, which a lot of wrestlers like to do. Just punching Paul Daly in the face, and Paul Daly just starts talking to the camera, saying, "This is bullshit. This isn't gonna get Bellator any fans. This is fucking bullshit." And and then he just starts booing. He just starts yelling, "Boo, boo!" And what's funny is at one point he starts saying this is bullshit, and his voice gets muffled by John Fitch's fist going into his mouth. So he's like getting a crap beat out of him, but he's like booing the fight. And we all know that Paul Daly hates wrestling and he wants nothing to do with it. He wants to stand and bang with everybody, but you're fighting mixed martial arts. Either learn how to get back up or defend takedowns if you don't want to be on the ground. I don't think you can get upset when a guy is able to put you on the ground at will and then beat the shit out of you. Because if this is a street fight, John Fitch would just lay on you and maybe the punches don't hurt you. But if he does it for an hour and a half, you're gonna be in a lot of trouble. So I think Paul Daly should probably just quit MMA and do like glory kickboxing or something, because I'm kind of tired of hearing him complain about getting taken down and smothered. And a lot of people may not remember Paul Daly was kicked out of the UFC forever because Josh Koscheck essentially did the same thing to him. And then at the end of the fight, Paul Daly got up and walked over to Josh Koscheck and punched him in the face. So obviously his sportsmanship has improved slightly since he didn't punch John Fitch after the fight, but really dominant performance by John Fitch in his Bellator debut. I know you didn't see it, Jeff, but any thoughts on this fight or the actions of Paul Daly here?
It sounds interesting, man, because I've always had a lot of respect for John Fitch. He's a great welterweight, man, and I know that not a lot of people would agree. A lot of people probably think he's not exciting, but tell me a bad fight that he's had, and tell me how much trouble he's had. He hasn't had a lot of trouble with a lot of guys, man. This is someone who you can compare to George St. Pierre, essentially. He's got the wrestling, his striking's pretty good. But yeah, dude, like you said, Paul Daly can't get mad. Learn to defend a takedown, learn how to get out from under somebody, or do what Uriah Hall used to do and just punch your way out. I remember him doing that on The Ultimate Fighter. But yeah, unfortunately, I didn't watch this. I'll probably go back and check it out. But yeah, Paul Daly he sounds like a brat at this point.
Yeah, it's kind of obnoxious. And if you're fighting John Fitch, you have to know what to expect. I mean, this is one of the baddest wrestlers at welterweight ever. So you have to know you're getting taken down. And John Fitch just kind of laughed it off at the end. He was like, "Hey, I did what I had to do. I won the fight." It's like you can't stop it, so you can't complain. Is my feeling on it. And if you're a regular listener of the show, you know my opinion on wrestlers. I'm a little biased. My feeling is what I always tell people is, have you ever tried to hold down somebody who doesn't want to be there, especially an explosive professional athlete, someone as explosive as Paul Daly, especially. So this was an impressive performance to me. I wouldn't say go back and watch the whole fight, Jeff, but definitely fast forward to that third round so you can see the antics. You can see how easily John Fitch was able to take Paul Daly down. He struggled a little bit in the first round, but as the fight went on, he figured out his spots in his chain wrestling that worked, and he was able to take Daly down at will, obviously. So the main event of this fight was part of the Bellator quote unquote heavyweight tournament, even though it was the light heavyweight champion and the number one contender at light heavyweight fighting at this one. And that is Ryan Bader and Muhammad King Mo Lawal. So King Mo weighed in, I think, at like 213 pounds. So what he's doing in a heavyweight tournament, I have no idea. I don't know what Bader weighed in at, but he definitely looked a little bit bigger. These two do have a history. They wrestled each other in college, and King Mo handled Ryan Bader pretty well and won the match, obviously. So I don't know if that was in the back of Bader's head, but this fight ended in 15 seconds, Jeff, with Bader getting the first round knockout, hit him with a big hook. He kind of stepped out really wide and then brought that left hook like from the third row into King Mo's face, and that was it. The end of the fight. So Bader moves on in the tournament. He's going to fight. Uh, the name is slipping right now.
Mitrione, I believe.
Yeah, Matt Mitrione. That's the name. So that'll be interesting because here you have basically a light heavyweight going against a legitimate heavyweight in Matt Mitrione. But Bader looked, pretty big. And then on the other side of the bracket, we have a middleweight in Chael Sonnen taking on a legitimate heavyweight in Fedor. So it'll be interesting to see how this thing plays out. Another thing to add in here is that King Mo said he was moving down to middleweight after this, and I believe it because he weighed in at 213, obviously, and he had on jeans and a hoodie and everything like that. So he probably walks around at 209, 210. So if he leaned out a little bit, middleweight would be a great place for him. He's been around a long time though, so I don't know how much longer he intends to stick around. He's 37 years old. And I'm happy to see he's going down to middleweight because that's exciting. I don't want to see him face Bader again for the light heavyweight championship after this tournament's over. And I definitely don't want to see him fight Rampage Jackson again. So I just threw a shitload of information at you, Jeff. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I feel like Bellator is starting to get better at making cards and matching fighters with each other. So this card, from top to bottom, looked pretty good. It looked like there were quite a few finishes on it. So good for Bellator, man. I want to see them do well. I want to see them give the UFC a run for their money. Uh, they have a style. They have a pretty some talented guys on their roster. I like that they have John Fitch. Aaron Pico is definitely someone to look out for. I was a little. I felt like his hype train got a little derailed with his debut, but he's picked it up since. He's fought a bunch of nobodies, but hopefully, um, we get to see his skills on display in the near future.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so it was a pretty good card from Bellator overall. The problem with Bellator is they put so many fights on the card, and I'm looking at the results now. Like some of these fights say that they haven't even happened yet. So what they do is they get to a certain time and they start the main card, and then anybody who's fighting on the undercard will fight after the main event, which I really don't like about them. I think that's really disorganized. Keep it to 12 fights or something. Don't put 18 or 20 fights on a card. That's ridiculous. Nobody wants to go there and sit for 12 hours in an arena. A lot of people will even just show up for the main card. They won't even come for the prelims and stuff like that. So I'm with you though, Jeff. I want to see Bellator succeed. They're talking about doing Rampage Jackson versus Vanderlei Silva part 4, which I don't know. I don't know if I want to see that. That's almost as ridiculous as Oscar De La Hoya starting an MMA organization, and he's trying to get Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz part 3. I mean, we saw how that ended twice. It wasn't much different. These are two guys that should probably stay retired, but I'm ashamed to admit, Jeff, it's a fucking spectacle, and I'll probably watch it if it happens. But, but I hope Oscar De La Hoya doesn't make any money off of it, because fuck that guy.
Yeah, man, he's a wild one.
Yeah, I guess he's got to fund his pantyhose habit or whatever he's got to do. No judgment here. In any case, I don't know if anything else is going on in the news. Let's take a quick look. We got a fight night coming up next weekend, and it's going to be in Chile. And it was supposed to be headlined by Santiago Ponzinibbio and Kamaru Usman. So Ponzinibbio had to pull out, and Damian Maia stepping in. So that's the main event there. Damian Maia against Kamaru Usman. I think that's a really interesting fight. Kamaru Usman, a lot of people, for the longest time, a lot of people didn't really care for him. He was a little dull. And then Joe Rogan said he's the most underrated fighter on the roster. And then everybody started kissing his ass. I do think he was underrated, but I don't know by how much. He is fairly well-rounded. He's got some knockout power, and he's got great wrestling. I'll say that about him. Damian Maia, I this is a dangerous fight for him, taking on short notice. But it seems like Damian Maia is always a guy who has his back against the wall in this organization for whatever reason. I don't really understand it. So I'm just looking up and down the card here, seeing if anything else jumps out to me, and nothing really, which tells me that this is probably going to be a fucking awesome card because that's usually the case. If you don't recognize the names, those are usually pretty hungry fighters. So, you have a moderately interesting main event, and then who knows what else could happen. But that's the reason we love this sport. Any thoughts on this card, Jeff?
Yeah, dude. The main event looks really interesting stylistically. You have the wrestler versus the jiu-jitsu fighter, so it should be pretty good. And then I see Brandon Moreno on here. He's a good Mexican fighter. I believe he was on the Ultimate Fighter Nations or Latin America, one of those two. But solid flyweight. Hopefully, he can breathe some life into this division that is overruled by what's his name, Demetrius Johnson.
Yeah, for sure. And then he's fighting Alex Pantoja there. Uh, yeah, and yeah, I don't really see anything else on here, which is rare because normally I'll pick out a sleeper match or something like that. But um, Alexa Grasso is fighting in the co-main event against the undefeated Tatiana Suarez. That'll be a great fight. I'm sorry, I overlooked that one. And then you got Jared Cannonier on here also fighting an undefeated Dominic Reyes. So that could be interesting too. All right. The more I'm looking at this, the more excited I'm getting for this. I'll definitely be tuning in. It's a free fight night, so why the fuck not, right, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm all for it.
All right. So I don't have anything else to report here. I've been drinking a lot of tequila lately, but and that's because I read somewhere that it's healthier. So I've been doing that. I don't have any brands specifically I want to plug here. No sponsors this week. But as always, send me your drink recommendations. I'm always looking to try something new. I saw a lot of cool stuff you guys are drinking during the fights on Saturday night, so I always like getting those tweets about what you guys are drinking because that's a lot of what this show is about. It's about regular guys who like to drink some booze and watch some violence. So if you want to get a hold of some of those regular guys, feel free to do so on social media. You can reach Jeff at animal_Wilson on Twitter. And of course, you guys know how to get a hold of me. It's at MMA on the Rocks, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, anywhere else on social media. I'm out there. So shoot me a line. Don't be shy. Let us know what you're thinking and drinking out there. All right. That's all we got. So until next week, cheers, everybody. Goodbye.